It wasn't exactly the homecoming I'd imagined. When my grandmother passed away last spring, leaving me her dilapidated house in a remote Greek village, it was the last thing I wanted. I hadn't been back since I was a kid, and frankly, I'd forgotten the place existed. Still, I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be a fresh start for us. Ellie sat beside me in the passenger seat, her fingers tapping nervously on her phone. "Are you sure this is the right place, Alex?" I glanced at the GPS, which was barely functioning in these mountains. "Looks like it. Welcome to nowhere." The village sprawled below us, a tiny cluster of stone houses clinging to the hillside, surrounded by an endless sea of olive trees. It looked the same as I remembered, quaint, isolated, and eerily quiet. As a kid, I had loved the freedom the wide-open spaces gave me, but now, an adult, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. The village seemed too still, as if time itself had forgotten it. "We'll fix up the house, sell it, and head back to the city," I said, trying to reassure both her and myself. "It's not like we're staying here forever." Ellie smiled weakly. "I'll hold you to that." The house came into view as we wound our way down the narrow dirt road. It stood at the edge of the village, its crumbling walls half hidden by overgrown vines. The olive grove stretched behind it, an ancient forest that seemed to go on forever. I remembered running through those trees as a child, but now they loomed dark and foreboding, casting long shadows across the ground. We pulled up to the front gate, which hung crookedly on rusted hinges. I stepped out of the car and stretched, the weight of the long drive settling in my bones. The air was thick with the scent of olives and something else, a faint, musty odor that clung to the back of my throat. "Home sweet home," I muttered, grabbing the keys from my pocket. Ellie hesitated as she got out of the car. "It feels strange here, don't you think?" I shrugged, though I couldn't deny the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. "It's just an old house in an old village. Let's check it out." The front door creaked open with a groan, and we stepped inside. Dust clung to every surface, and the air was heavy with neglect. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners of the room. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, waiting for us to return. "We'll clean it up," I said, more to convince myself than her. "It's just a little dusty." Ellie wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. I followed her into the kitchen, where an old wooden table sat in the center of the room. A single window overlooked the grove, its gnarled trees twisting in the afternoon light. "That's where you used to play, right?" Ellie asked, nodding toward the olive grove. "Yeah," I said, my voice distant. "I used to spend hours out there. My grandmother told me all kinds of stories about the grove." "Stories?" Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" I hesitated, the memories flooding back in vivid detail. She used to say the grove was cursed, that it was guarded by a spirit, something ancient and angry. I thought it was just a way to keep me from wandering too far. Ellie chuckled, though there was a hint of unease in her voice. "Well, we're not here to anger any spirits. Let's just get this place in shape and get out." But as we stood there, staring out at the olive trees swaying gently in the breeze, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The village, the house, the grove, it all felt like it was waiting for something. The first few days passed uneventfully. Ellie and I cleaned the house, removing years of dust and decay, though the strange feeling never left. Every night as we lay in bed, I could hear the wind howling through the olive grove, almost as if it was whispering in a language I didn't understand. It wasn't until we met one of the villagers that things started to unravel. I was out front, fixing the crooked gate, when an old woman approached. Her skin was weathered from the sun, and her clothes hung loosely on her frail frame. She walked with a cane, each step slow and deliberate, but her eyes were sharp, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You're Alexandra's grandson," she said, her voice rasping. I nodded, standing up and wiping my hands on my jeans. "Yeah, that's right. I'm Alex." The woman didn't smile. Instead, she looked past me, her gaze fixed on the olive grove behind the house. "You should leave," she said, her tone flat and cold. I frowned. "Excuse me?" "Your grandmother knew," the woman continued, her eyes never leaving the trees. "She knew the curse that lies beneath those roots." I laughed nervously. "It's just an old story, something to scare kids." The old woman's gaze snapped back to me, her eyes narrowing. "It is no story, boy. There is something buried there, something that should never be disturbed." Before I could respond, she turned and hobbled away, disappearing down the dirt road without another word. I watched her go, my heart racing in my chest. I wanted to brush off her warning as the ramblings of an old woman, but her words lingered in my mind, the curse that lies beneath those roots. That night, as the wind howled and the trees groaned in the dark, I couldn't sleep. Something about the grove felt wrong, as if the trees were watching, waiting. That night, sleep refused to come. I tossed and turned, but my mind kept drifting back to the old woman's words. Her voice echoed in my head, cold and steady. Something buried should never be disturbed. Ellie stirred beside me, rolling over to face me in the dark. "Alex, are you awake?" "Yeah," I whispered, staring up at the ceiling. "Can't sleep. You?" "I keep hearing noises," she said softly. "It's like someone's whispering outside." I felt a chill run down my spine. "It's just the wind," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Ellie was quiet for a moment. "Maybe, but it feels strange, doesn't it? This place?" I reached out, taking her hand. "It's just an old village. Old places have old stories. We'll get this house fixed up and be gone in no time." She squeezed my hand, but I could sense the unease in her silence. I lay awake long after Ellie drifted off, listening to the wind rustling through the olive grove, but there was something more than just the wind. It was faint, almost impossible to make out, but if I strained hard enough, I could hear it. Whispers, low and unintelligible, weaving through the rustling leaves like a warning. I sat up, heart racing. It had to be my imagination, a trick of the night. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be calling me, pulling me toward the grove. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Ellie, and crept to the window. The olive trees swayed gently in the breeze, their twisted branches casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I felt the weight of the grove pressing down on me, as if it was alive and watching. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and headed outside. The moment I stepped out into the cool night air, the whispers seemed to quiet, as though they were retreating deeper into the grove. My pulse quickened as I followed the sound, my feet crunching on the dry earth beneath me. The grove seemed darker, more oppressive, as I ventured deeper into the trees. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of olives and something else, something metallic, like blood. I paused, shining the flashlight around, but the trees only swayed in silence. And then I saw it. At the base of the oldest olive tree, half hidden in the shadows, was a mound of earth, freshly disturbed. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. The earth was loose, as if someone or something had been digging there recently. I knelt down, brushing aside the dirt with trembling fingers. My breath caught in my throat as I uncovered a small, weathered box buried just beneath the surface. The wood was old and cracked, held together by rusted metal hinges. Without thinking, I pried it open. Inside was a single item, a twisted, gnarled olive branch, blackened with age. But that wasn't what sent a jolt of fear through me. Wrapped around the branch was a length of frayed rope, and at the end of it, a bone. Human, by the looks of it. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. What the hell had I just found? Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder this time, like a chorus of voices all speaking at once. My heart pounded in my ears as the wind picked up, whipping through the grove with an unnatural force. The branches above me creaked and groaned, and I could swear I saw shapes moving in the shadows. I had to get out of there. I scrambled to my feet, dropping the flashlight in my panic. The beam flickered and went out, plunging the grove into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were angry now, accusing. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I stumbled through the trees. The grove seemed endless, the shadows closing in around me. I could barely see, but I didn't stop, driven by a primal fear that something was chasing me, something ancient and malevolent. By the time I burst out of the grove and into the yard, I was gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. The house loomed ahead of me, a beacon of safety, and I sprinted toward it, slamming the door behind me as I stumbled inside. Ellie was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Alex? What happened? You're bleeding. I glanced down at my hands and saw the dark streaks of blood smeared across my skin. My mind raced, but I couldn't remember getting hurt. All I could remember were the whispers, the digging, and the box. I found something, I stammered, my voice shaking. In the grove, a box. There was a bone inside. Ellie's face went pale. A bone? Alex, we need to leave, now. I nodded, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Something was very, very wrong here, and the old woman's warning echoed in my mind. The curse that lies beneath those roots. The next morning, I didn't wait for the whispers to come again. I went to find the old woman. The village was quiet, the air heavy with the weight of something unseen. As I made my way down the narrow streets, the villagers eyed me warily, whispering among themselves. It was as if they knew something I didn't, something they were too afraid to say. I found her sitting outside her small stone house, her cane resting beside her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You found it, didn't you?" she said, her voice as dry and brittle as the olive branches. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What is it? What's buried in that grove?" The old woman sighed, her eyes distant. "It's not what's buried," she said softly. "It's what's trapped." I frowned. "Trapped? What do you mean?" She motioned for me to sit, and I did, though every instinct told me to run far away from this place. "There is an old story," she began, her voice low. "A story of a man who angered the gods. He was a farmer, proud and greedy, and he thought he could defy the will of the land. He cursed the soil, poisoned the roots, and the gods took vengeance. They sent a spirit to guard the grove, to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again." I shivered. "A spirit?" She nodded. "The Kalakansaros. It is not a demon, as some say, but a guardian. It was sent to keep the evil beneath the grove sealed away. But over time, the villagers forgot the old ways. They stopped making offerings to the spirit, stopped respecting the grove, and now the seal is weakening." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happens if the seal breaks?" The old woman's gaze was cold and steady. "The evil will rise, and no one will be safe." I left the old woman's house in a daze, her words ringing in my ears. The Kalakansaros, an ancient guardian sent by the gods, and worse, something even more terrifying, buried beneath the grove. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How was any of this real? But deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. The bone, the whispers, the way the grove seemed alive with a malevolent energy, it all pointed to something beyond my understanding. And now, whatever was trapped beneath the grove was stirring. When I returned to the house, Ellie was waiting for me on the porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't need to ask where I'd been. One look at my face and she knew. "We have to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't care about the house. We need to go. Now." I nodded. I talked to the old woman. She told me about the grove, about what's buried there. Ellie's eyes widened. "What did she say?" "She said there's something evil trapped beneath the grove, a curse. And if the seal breaks..." I didn't need to finish the sentence. Ellie understood. Without another word, we packed our bags. The house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a tomb, waiting to claim us. We needed to leave before the curse took hold, before the whispers grew louder, before whatever was buried beneath the earth broke free. But as we loaded the car, something strange happened. The wind picked up, stronger than before, whipping through the olive grove with a deafening roar. The trees bent and swayed, their branches thrashing wildly, as if they were trying to tear themselves from the ground. Ellie looked at me, her face pale with fear. "Alex, what's happening?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the grove was alive, and it was angry. "We need to go," I said, my voice tight with panic. "Now." But just as I reached for the car door, a deafening crack split the air. I turned, heart pounding, and saw the massive olive tree at the center of the grove. Its trunk had split open, a jagged crack running down its side, and from within that crack something was moving, something dark and writhing. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, louder than ever before, swirling around us like a storm. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the seal was breaking. "We have to stop it," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. "We can't leave. If we go, whatever is in there will get out." Ellie stared at me, wide-eyed. How? How do we stop it?" "I don't know," I admitted, fear clawing at my chest. but if we don't do something, it's going to break free. For a moment, Ellie hesitated, torn between her instinct to flee and the gravity of the situation. Finally, she nodded, her expression grim. What do we do? I thought back to the old woman's words. The villagers forgot the old ways. They stopped making offerings. The seal had weakened because the spirit, the Kalakantsaros, had been neglected. We needed to restore it, restore the balance. We need to make an offering, I said, my mind racing. To the Kalakantsaros, we need to appease it. Ellie looked at me like I was insane, but after a moment, she nodded. What kind of offering? I don't know, I admitted, but it has to be something meaningful, something that shows respect. We scrambled through the house, searching for anything that might work. An old family heirloom, a silver necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, a bowl of olive oil, anything we thought might placate the ancient spirit. With shaking hands, we gathered the items and made our way back to the grove. The wind had only gotten worse. The trees groaned and creaked, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The crack in the olive tree had grown wider, and the dark shape inside it pulsed and writhed, as if it was trying to force its way out. We knelt at the base of the tree, placing the items in a small pile at its roots. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to speak. Kali Kantsaros, I called out, my voice barely audible over the wind. We offer this to you. Please, guard this grove. Keep whatever is buried here sealed away. For a moment, nothing happened. The wind continued to howl, the tree continued to tremble, and the darkness within the crack writhed and squirmed. I held my breath, waiting, praying that the offering would be enough. And then, slowly, the wind began to die down. The trees stopped thrashing, the whispers faded, the crack in the olive tree sealed itself, the darkness retreating back into the earth. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my chest. It was over. Ellie and I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the tree, unable to believe what had just happened. The grove was silent now, the air heavy with an eerie stillness. We did it, Ellie whispered, her voice trembling with relief. We stopped it. But even as she spoke the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The seal had been restored, but it wasn't permanent. Whatever was buried beneath the grove was still there, waiting, and someday it would try to break free again. This is the next part of the story, bringing us closer to the climax, where Alex and Ellie confront the ancient curse. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. Ellie and I had barely spoken since that night at the grove. The atmosphere in the village had shifted, and though the whispers had faded, the weight of the place remained. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like something unfinished, something waiting. Ellie tried to push forward, focusing on fixing up the house and planning our departure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't done here, that the thing beneath the olive tree hadn't been fully sealed away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crack in the tree, the dark shape writhing just beneath the surface. One morning, as Ellie was cleaning out the kitchen cupboards, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I'm going back, I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the silence. Ellie looked up from the dishes, her eyes widening. What? Back to the grove? Alex, we can't. I need to know, I interrupted, feeling the weight of my own words. I need to understand what we're dealing with. The old woman told me just enough to make me afraid, but she didn't tell me everything. Ellie hesitated, setting down the plate she was holding. Alex, we barely made it out last time. Whatever is down there, it's ancient and it's dangerous. I know, I said, my voice firm, but I can't just leave without knowing. If this thing breaks free, it could destroy everything. We have to stop it, for good. Ellie stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and nodded. Okay, but we're doing this together. The old woman was waiting for us. It was as if she had known we would return. I warned you, she said as we approached her small house. I told you to leave it alone. We didn't have a choice, I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The seal is breaking. We stopped it once, but it's not enough. We need to know how to keep it sealed forever. The old woman shook her head slowly. There is no forever. The curse runs deep, deeper than you can imagine. Ellie stepped forward, her voice pleading. There has to be something, some way to stop it. The old woman stared at us for a long moment, then sighed heavily. There is only one way, she said softly, but it requires great sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? I asked, my heart pounding. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. The curse was born from blood. To stop it, you must offer blood in return. I felt a chill run down my spine. Blood? What do you mean? The Kalakantsaros is not just a guardian, the old woman explained, her voice low and steady. It was once a man who angered the gods, cursed to guard the grove for eternity. But the seal weakens over time, and the only way to strengthen it is to offer a life. Ellie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A life? The old woman nodded grimly. The spirit requires an offering. Blood for blood, life for life. Only then will the seal be restored. I felt the weight of her words settle over me like a heavy fog. The curse could be stopped, but it would come at a terrible cost. Whose life? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old woman's eyes flickered toward the grove. The one who broke the seal. The one who uncovered what should have stayed buried. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me. I couldn't process it at first. The reality of what the old woman had said washed over me in waves, each more suffocating than the last. Blood for blood, life for life. The only way to save Ellie, to save the village, was to offer myself to the Kalakantsaros. Alex, no, Ellie said, her voice trembling. We'll find another way. There has to be another way. There isn't, I said, my voice hollow. You heard her. This curse has been around for centuries. If we don't do something, it'll get out, and when it does... I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. I can't lose you. I reached out, taking her hand. You won't. I'll always be with you, but this is the only way. For a long moment, we stood there, the weight of the decision hanging between us. And then, without another word, we made our way to the grove. The olive trees loomed above us, their twisted branches casting long shadows in the fading light. The air was thick with the scent of olives and something darker, something ancient. The crack in the old olive tree had returned, wider than before, and the dark shape inside pulsed with a malevolent energy. I knelt at the base of the tree, feeling the earth tremble beneath me. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, urging me forward. Alex, please, Ellie whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. I looked up at her, my heart breaking at the sight of her tears. I have to. For you. For us. Before she could stop me, I took the knife from my pocket and drew it across my palm, letting the blood drip onto the roots of the olive tree. The ground seemed to absorb it, the earth drinking in the offering with an unnatural hunger. The whispers grew louder, and the dark shape inside the tree began to recede, retreating back into the earth. The crack in the tree sealed itself, the ancient evil contained once more. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, my vision blurring as the world around me faded. When I woke, the grove was quiet. Ellie was kneeling beside me, her face pale with worry. Alex, are you okay? I nodded slowly, my body aching from the effort of what I'd done. The olive tree stood before us, whole and unbroken, the curse sealed away once more. But something had changed. I could feel it in the air, a weight lifted, a presence gone. The Kalakantsaros were gone. The spirit had accepted my offering, and with it, the curse had been broken, for now. We left the village that night, not looking back. The house, the grove, the curse, it was all part of a past we could never return to. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but feel that the grove wasn't finished with us. Some curses, I realized, are never truly broken.